Okay, we're back. We're live. I'm Jay Fidel. Here it is at the 1 o'clock block on a Monday afternoon. And this is Research in Manoa. Let me say that Research in Manoa is one of my favorite programs, and I hope you watch it regularly because people don't know the brilliant things that are going on at UH in SOEST, the School of Ocean and Earth Science, and its, I guess its part, which is HIGP, the Hawaii Institute of Geophysics and Planetology. It's decades old. It's got a huge tradition. It's got, you know, fantastic achievements, articles written in every journal in the world. And it's got researchers galore that are finding out the secrets of the universe, not only here in Hawaii, but as relates to the entire planet. We are understanding our planet better for SOEST and HIGP. And one of the researchers that we need to talk to is Fernando Martinez. He's a researcher in marine geophysics, which is really important in understanding an ocean state and the Pacific Ocean and the ocean in general. So we're going to call this Tectonics Under the Sea. That's the short name. I'm going to give you the long name now. It's Understanding Tectonics Processes and the Geologic Evolution of Our Planet. Whoa.
Yep. It's a big title.
Welcome to the show, Fernando.
Great to be here, Jay.
Fernando. So let's talk about how you got to be where you are today, and what I should do if I want to get your job.
Oh, well, you got to start out with a long period of time in school. I started out in Brooklyn, New York, and I went to both undergraduate and graduate school there.
What school?
I got my PhD from Columbia University.
It's a very good school.
Yeah. And
with a huge endowment, by the way.
Yes. It was a very good school. It specialized in, it had a special lab that worked on marine geophysics in particular. At the time it was called the Lamont Doherty Geological Observatory. And they did a lot of work all over the world on all types of marine processes, emphasizing plate tectonics in particular, because at the time that was the latest theory that had come out, well, in just a couple of decades before I got there, but it actually took off and was being intensely studied at that time. So it was a great field to be in, and that was a great place to study.
And you're from New York?
Yes.
From Brooklyn?
Brooklyn.
I'm from Queens.
Oh, yeah, wow.
But what in the world made you want to go to school and study marine geophysics?
Well, I was always interested in science, and you know, New York doesn't seem like the most likely place to lead you to go and study what's at the bottom of the ocean. But I tried various things and decided I liked geology. And so I majored in that in my undergraduate work, and that was just more or less a very general geology background.
Sorry.
So I had a very general undergraduate background in geology. And then I applied to Columbia University and got in, and there were a bunch of different subjects that people were working on. And typically in a research lab, there are projects that are funded by the National Science Foundation to work on. And those tend to be the ones that are looking for students to work on projects as graduate students, because they can fund you in part. So I was lucky enough to participate on a project that started looking at the Red Sea.
The Red Sea?
Yeah. That was my...
That's the other direction.
The other side of the Earth. So that was my beginnings in marine geophysics. I got started on a cruise. I went to the Red Sea. We did some geophysical mapping, mapping of the seafloor, collecting a bunch of different data sets. We're trying to understand how the Earth rifts apart and how a new ocean basin forms. So it's really looking at the...
And you're dedicated to this. This has been your professional career from the time of the Red Sea till now.
I've been doing basically that kind of work all this time in different environments and in different parts of the world. But the basic focus has always been to try to understand these large-scale processes that the Earth undergoes and how it evolves in time.
What about them fascinates you this way?
Well, in part is the fact that it's very difficult to understand from a human perspective because these processes take so long that you never see them actually move, you never see them in operation for the most part.
I suppose we should be happy about that.
Yeah, well,
because if they took place over a short time, we'd pay a big price.
Well, we do pay a big price because some of the events do take place over short time intervals, and we can see what happens when that happens. So
okay.
Over the geologic time periods where these processes actually lead to measurable differences on the surface of the Earth, these things like earthquakes and tsunamis are taking place hundreds of thousands of times.
Yeah.
And so it's the accumulation of all of these processes that we only have little snapshots of that forms the planet we live on now.
So what is, as opposed to, say, a professor who teaches lectures and the like, what does a researcher do professionally?
Well, we focus more on research projects. We also generally have students. We have graduate students, and we also teach on occasion.
Mm-hmm.
So we do all the things that a professor does, but in a lot of ways we're more focused on research.
It's a different track?
Yes.
Is it a tenure track also?
It can be, yes. It can be a tenure track as well. So the main difference is that we spend more time trying to get research funding for our projects rather than instruction.
So are your work and work in this area, in tectonic process and all that, is that generally funded by research grants from outside or where else?
For the most part, it's funded by federal research grants, mostly through the National Science Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
They're the primary source of funding. But more recently, other institutions and governments have been interested in this kind of work. There's been increasing interest from governments and corporations that are interested in things like mining the seafloor.
Oil?
Well, oil is one thing, but that's been going on for a long time.
The new mining is for new products, they're new minerals.
They're minerals.
That have not been customarily mined from the seafloor before.
That's right. So other than oil, there's been very little else mined. I mean, there's gas and oil. And now we're looking into solid rock. So things like compounds that contain copper, zinc, gold, and silver, as well as other rock products like manganese nodules that are also very useful because they contain valuable metals. And these things have been inaccessible because they mostly form on the very deep ocean floor. But as these minerals get scarcer on land and the cost of mining them on land increases, it becomes more feasible to actually mine these minerals on the seafloor. In part because on the seafloor they're in the state where they're forming. So they're not deeply buried.
Yeah.
For the most part, they're just on the surface of the seafloor, and you don't have to go through a mile of rock. You have to go through a few miles of water.
So it's an economic question.
Right.
You don't have to spend that much accessing the minerals. But let me go back to the Red Sea for a minute. So it strikes me that when you're doing research in one place, it's going to be focused on what the seafloor is like in that place. And in another place, it's going to be focused on that geography. And we don't have too much of this going on in Minnesota.
No.
Because you want to be near the ocean.
That's right.
So can you give us the track of your career from the Red Sea on to the university and the Institute of Geophysics and Planetology?
Well, when I graduated from Columbia, I applied for different jobs, and I got the one here. That was at the time where our school, SOAS, the School of Ocean Earth Science and Technology, was first forming.
It's like 30 years ago.
Yeah, almost, back in 1988.
Yeah, okay.
And they were expanding and they were hiring a lot of new people, and I was one of those people that were lucky enough to be hired, and
you
I
were
came out.
all too happy to come out here, too.
Yes, I'd only been out here very briefly once before,
Mm-hmm.
actually going out on a research cruise.
Mm-hmm.
But I came at the start of the school, and a lot of very interesting people were also working here. And it was a great place to study this because there was sort of a group of interested individuals.
It was already famous in the 80s.
Yeah, it was. The Hawaii Institute of Geophysics, what it was back then, was doing a lot of mapping in the Pacific. They were doing a lot of deep sea exploration. And at the time, the plate tectonics of the Pacific wasn't well known. So that was a really important aspect in terms of the development of the whole field.
So you've been working on refining your research, refining your issues and methodologies and scientific thinking in this area, in this seafloor area, tectonic process, now for almost, am I right, almost 30 years?
That's right, almost 30 years.
Yeah, oh.
So
Go ahead.
it was, it's refining on the one hand, but it's also exploring new areas on the other. So there's always new things. It's not going into more and more detail specifically on one process.
So what has the sort of the evolution of your career been, your scientific research career been in those years?
Well, you know, like I said, I started out looking at the Red Sea, and that was a large continent that rifted apart. And when I came out here in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, there aren't too many large continents rifting apart. So what I became interested in was looking at the subduction process, how one plate goes underneath another. So you go from extension to convergence. And what happens in some of these is actually the plate that's subducting is sinking faster than it's moving in, and it causes it to pull away from the overriding plate, from the other plate. That creates extension. So it seems a little bit contradictory that a converging plate would create extension, but when it's sinking faster than it's coming in, it actually does create extension. So I got to then look at these extensional zones. So sort of going back to my roots of looking at extensional processes. But now these are taking place behind a subduction zone, and that changes
Subduction
everything.
means where it's drawing down?
Yes, so subduction zones are where one lithospheric plate sinks back into the deep earth, the mantle.
Yeah.
And that creates a whole new environment for the process of extension behind it, because now you're injecting new materials into the mantle, and among them are things like water, sediments, crust. All these things go back into the deep earth and begin to melt again, or make it easier for the mantle itself to melt. And then the materials that come out are different than simply by extending a previously existing continent.
So the items that, I mean, the material that goes down, you know, into this subduction zone and get melted as it gets closer to the mantle or into the mantle, does the material, is there an equal force of material coming back up again?
Yes.
And does it come up in the same place or in a different place?
Well, it comes up in a different place, but there's a balance because the surface of the Earth doesn't increase in size. For the most part, it's very stable. And so what goes down must come up. And what comes up at the mid-ocean ridges. Those are the spreading centers. And those that tend to be producing a lot of volcanism. They're the longest volcanic chains on Earth, and they produce basically the seafloor. And as the seafloor forms, it cools. Those plates get cooler and cooler, which means they get denser and denser. And they reach a point where they're actually denser than the mantle underneath them.
And then what? Then
they want to
go down again. So it's a continuous process.
Right. It's a big cycle, and it's basically an unstable situation because the Earth is continually forming new surface plates that with time become denser than the mantle. So they always want to eventually sink back in. And this is sort of the engine that's running
The
all
engine, the
of
engine.
plate tectonics.
So maybe we should rename the show, what goes down must come up, or what
could be.
comes up must go down.
There is a sort of a driving force, and it's the basic gravitational instability that's continually set up on the Earth by this process, and it's maintained by the heat of the Earth, which is in large part the radioactive decay. And as long as we have radioactive decay, we're going to have heat, and this is going to go on for several more billions of years.
You didn't know that. I didn't know that. It's an engine, and heat is at the center of this process that
That's right.
goes up and down. Fernando Martinez, researcher in marine geophysics at HIGP, the Hawaii Institute of Geophysical Planetology, here on Research in Manoa, Tectonics Under the Sea. We'll be right back.
Aloha, my name is Justina Spiritu, and I'm the co-host of Hawaii Farmers Series. This is my co-host, Matthew Johnson, and you can catch us every Thursday at 4 p.m. at ThinkTechHawaii.com. What do we talk about, Matt?
So on Hawaii Farmers Series, we're going to be bringing on the farmers and also supporter of farmers, including restaurants, caterers, as well as government supporters and nonprofits to hear their background stories and understanding our local ag community just a little bit better.
Yeah, essentially there's a lot more that goes into farming and the local food community beyond just producing the food. And we want to feature and get the background story on all these folks and see how we all work together as a community. So join us every Thursday. Aloha.
Hi, I'm your host on ThinkTech Asia, Bill Sharp. I look forward to you joining us each Monday between 4 and 5 o'clock when we film right here in our studio in downtown Honolulu. The show, ThinkTech Asia, focuses on contemporary events in Asia, and by Asia we mean anything from Hawaii, south to Australia and New Zealand, west to Pakistan, and as far north as the Russian Far East. Clearly, this is one of the most economically dynamic centers of the world, and we bring you up to date on what's going on in a whole host of countries in this very vital region. We look forward to seeing you. Aloha.
Hi, my name's Hillary Weinberg. I'm the host of The Whole Gamut on ThinkTech Hawaii. See us live every Tuesday at 1 p.m. or on our YouTube channel to hear us talk about world affairs from Hawaii and beyond. See you then.
Aloha, I'm Carlos Juarez, host of Global Connections, and I want to invite you to come join us. We cover a range of global issues. We bring a lot of expert opinion, a lot of issues, whether they're contemporary events happening in the world or maybe looking at things from a more historical perspective. Global issues, very important for us to understand in this globally interconnected world. Join us here on Global Connections.
Okay, we're back. We're live. We're here with Fernando Martinez. He's a researcher in marine geophysics at SOWEST and HIGP. We're talking about tectonics under the sea. And one thing I want to just confirm is that when you get into an area like this, and there are tectonics, there are undersea processes happening really all over the world, and you begin to see the world as a kind of engine where things are going up and down by virtue of the heat process, heat, melting, cooling, melting, cooling. If you get to be a global person, you have to see the whole thing, the whole Earth as integrated in these processes. They're all related, am I right?
That's right. So there's a natural equilibrium and balance. One part of the Earth sinking means that there has to be extension somewhere else. And so the motion of these plates is not independent. The motion of one plate affects another one and so forth. And so there's a big interrelationship between all of these things on the large scale.
So you can't be shy about traveling.
No, in fact, I've been working on everywhere from the Red Sea to the North Atlantic to the South Atlantic, many areas in the South Pacific, Western Pacific, so Mariana Trench.
Now the question of our second segment is working. What does working mean? What kind of equipment do you need? What kind of vessels, if vessels are required? What kind of instruments? How do you do your work? I guess you're mapping tectonic structures at the ocean bottom. How do you do that?
Well, we certainly need research ships. That's the most important single item. Is we need a platform to get out there because you can't study the bottom of the ocean from your lab. So you really have to get out there. And the ship can go out for a month or more at a time. Usually our cruises are about a month long. And as to the equipment, we usually take a variety of different types of equipment. An important part that is almost always there is seafloor mapping equipment. And in the old days, that used to be a simple pinger that would just
Sonar.
Sonar. It would ping these sonar waves, would just come up and down a single beam, and that would only give you a profile of the bathymetry, the trace of the seafloor as the ship was moving along. These things have evolved a lot since I've started using them, and now we have these multi-beam systems that have many beams and actually map out a broad width of seafloor as the ship moves along, so and in high detail, so that we can actually get a lot more done very quickly on a research ship. Mm-hmm. Then there are different kinds of sonars that we can use. The primary one is this multi-beam sonar that simply gives you mapping of the depths of the ocean. But other types of towed side-scan sonar, for example, give you information about...
What kind is that?
Side-scan sonar.
Side-scan.
Side-scan.
So these are all more sophisticated than the one-beam equipment you started out with years ago.
Exactly.
So what's the multi-beam? How does that work, and how many beams are there?
Well, there can be about 180 beams, and it works by using sound waves that are sent out and received on different types of transducer arrays. Mm-hmm. So they're sent out on a long array this way, and they're received on another array like this, and the combination of those can actually form beams.
And give you a photograph, if you will, a
yeah,
map
pretty
of
much,
the ocean floor.
A map, and pretty much in real time as you're moving along. Computers are so fast that they can process this data, and you're watching the seafloor mosaic build up as you're moving along in real time.
But sound moves slower in water.
Yeah.
So if you have a deep floor, it takes a while for the ping to come back, right?
Well, it takes, it moves at about 1,500 meters per second. So it'll take a few seconds.
Okay. Now here's one thing that throws me off, and it just occurred to me. We talked to other scientists at SOWEST and HIGP about mapping and sonar and all, but it occurs to me that you have the surface of the ocean is moving up and down, and as you mentioned a minute ago, the ship is moving in whatever forward motion it chooses, and you got these multiple sonar beams going down and coming up. How do you figure out, how do you exclude all the movement in evaluating the ping that comes back?
Well, that's where computers come in.
Yeah.
Computers are very fast, and the ship is arrayed with a set of sensors. They're attitude sensors. So they actually determine the roll, pitch, and yaw of the ship.
Inertial guidance?
Well, they're kind of like an inertial guidance system.
Maybe satellite?
So they're different accelerometers and gyroscopes that determine the motion on 3 axes of the ship.
Yeah.
So you always know where the ship is. So if you know the position of the ship, you know the sound velocity of water, of sound in water, you can calculate what each of these beams is going to do and the relative position of the ship when they come back.
So when they come back, it's as if the ship was not moving.
Right, you can account for that motion. And
cancel completely.
Completely.
That's really hard to do. Is that new technology?
It's been around, at least 20 years since the multi-beams systems have been out there, and longer than that actually. Yeah. But it's a matter of computation.
Okay, sure.
And computation speed.
Well, now, what's the difference between the multi-beam and the side scan, did you call it?
Side scan.
What is that?
The side scan sonar looks, so the multi-beam basically is trying to determine from the travel time of the sound waves the distance to the seafloor and the ship, and calculating the geometry so that you can lay it out properly geometrically as it is on the seafloor. whereas the Sidescan sonar is looking more at the intensity of the sound that comes back. So the intensity gives you different information. The intensity will tell you if it's a very strong return from the seafloor, that it's a hard surface, for example, like bare rock or recent lava flows. Whereas if the return is more muted, a weaker signal that comes back from that particular part of the seafloor, then it's probably sediment covered.
So the sound was absorbed by a softer rock
right.
down there.
Yeah, it's like echoes, you know, in sound. If you're yelling against a hard wall versus a curtain or a soft mattress, is going to be weaker.
If the fish can do it, we can do it.
That's
we can
right,
tell.
yeah.
We can
So what that ultimately does is paint almost like a photograph of the seafloor, where you can see if it's rock, if it's sedimented, if it's facing towards the sonar or away from it. So it kind of gives you a different perspective of it. It looks more like a black and white photograph than like a map.
So you wouldn't use the single band anymore, because that's old technology. But you use the multiple. What do you call it? Multiple.
Well, they form different beams, but usually on a sonar system or even a multibeam system, it'll operate at a certain frequency. Different frequencies travel through are absorbed in different ways by the water column. So higher frequencies will give you better resolution, but they tend to be absorbed more. So
sometimes you do want to use the single beam.
Well, we still do use the single beam,
Yeah.
and in part because it can penetrate to a certain depth beneath the seafloor, and so you can see sediment thicknesses, for example, with the single beam.
You can get into the detail of that one area that it's beaming at. So then you're using all three.
Yeah, we still do.
Yeah.
We use side-scan sonar, we use multi-beam sonars, and we use the single beam profilers, they call them now.
Now, does the sonar initiate in the ship or in pods physically attached to the ship, or does it initiate in something that you tow along behind you?
Well, they're all three, really. Multi-beam sonars are typically mounted on the hull of the ship.
Mm-hmm.
They're standard.
Fixed.
They're a fixed part of the ship. And then there are towed sonars. So the side-scan sonars that we use in our group in Hawaii are primarily towed sonars that are different depths. So the higher frequency sonars that give you a better resolution but are more attenuated in the water column, those can be towed near the seafloor and give you down deep.
And you can control the depth on it.
Yes, because they're attached to the ship by a cable.
So you can control the amount of cable it plays out.
That's right. So by controlling the amount of cable and the ship speed, we can get the sonar to stay more or less at a given depth or at a given distance above the seafloor.
That's going to be very detailed then, if you can get close to it.
Yeah.
And of course the instrument knows the depth, so
Yeah,
it can compensate for that.
It has a pressure gauge on it, so we can determine how deep it is. It also provides a signal itself of how far it is from its own sonar signal, how far up it is from the seafloor. And the control of the depth is usually by the operator of the winch on the ship itself. So they reel it in or pull it out.
Pulls the cable in or lets it go.
That's right.
Now, when all this is happening with all these instruments down there, and then the operator controlling the depth of the multi-beam sonar and so on, where are you? Are you in a room with computers getting all that data real time and looking at it on a screen, or multiple screens real time?
Yeah, it depends on exactly what we're looking at. The multi-beam sonar appears on a computer monitor, and you watch it there. And usually it's, just moving along, so you're not sitting there watching it continually. You'll accumulate a certain amount of data and then make a map and print that out and look at it and perhaps use that to decide where you want to go next. For the towed side-scan sonars, you're usually working in a room near where the operators of the sonar are. that's also producing an image as it comes out, usually a swath at a time, that then can be built up into a three-dimensional mosaic.
Okay.
And-
But the mission, science research-wise, is to get the data through these instruments and put it on a map that's probably a lot of points of data on a spreadsheet, but then you can process that into a map.
That's right.
And then you have this map. And that now you know what the seafloor looks like, and maybe to some extent feels like in terms of the hardness of the rock
Right.
at a given place, at a given moment in time. So how does that tell us about tectonic shifting?
Well, it tells us by looking at what's there in terms of the different geologic processes are going to create effects on the seafloor. For example, if there's a fault, you can see the fault.
You can see it.
You can see it in the displacement of the seafloor that creates an escarpment or a step.
What does it look like?
Well, it'll look like a step. Because
A step?
A step, yes. It'll be down here and then it'll jump up like this. And that'll indicate that there was a fault there.
It could be a small fault
Could
or
be
a really
small,
big
bigger.
one.
They could be fissures as well.
Or
just,
a fissure like in
like
the
a
movies,
crevasse, yeah.
like an earthquake fissure.
Right.
You could fall in there,
Exactly.
never be heard of again, yeah.
And then there'll also be things like lava flows, chains of small volcanoes. We call them seamounts on the seafloor. And all of these different geologic features can be interpreted in terms of the process. For example, if it was a volcanic event, or if it was a tectonic rifting event, or if there was some compressional event, all of these things generate distinctive geomorphology on the seafloor.
But you're looking at it historically. You're not
No.
on top of it looking down while it's happening.
For the most part, no, but there are repeat surveys at times in places that are volcanically active. For example, you can go back and see that this volcano has actually grown in a matter of years. It's changed, or there's been a landslide, or there's been a catastrophic explosion that has created now a deep caldera, a pit in the center of the volcano.
And that's very valuable.
Yes.
That shows you that there's a process, and then you can evaluate exactly how fast the process is going on and in
Right.
which way. Yeah.
Exactly. So we get a sense of the magnitude of these processes in terms of short time scales. We know that over long time scales, everything starts out small and grows enormously big, like the island we're on here.
Yeah.
Came out of nothing.
Yeah, you have to have a bunch of, a sequence of researchers, about 2,000 researchers, all one life after
We
another.
need lots of generations of marine geophysicists to get it all.
Okay, now we're going to take this data, and we're going to take these what did you call them, the fissures and the steps, and we're going to make sense of that out of that in a minute, because Fernando Martinez is going to tell us how he gets this information and then tells us about the global process of tectonic shifting right after this break.
Aloha, my name is Josh Green. I'm a senator from the Big Island and the ER physician. Every other Tuesday, I get to host a show here on the ThinkTech program about healthcare. We call it Healthcare in Hawaii. It's really enjoyable for me to bring other healthcare leaders from around the state to talk about our pressing issues. Hawaii has long been the health state, but we need to keep up the momentum, the inertia, and with your help and with your participation, we can come and share all of the big issues that are pressing day to day. Thanks for joining us every Tuesday, alternating weeks from 2 to 2:45.
Okay, we're back, we're live, we're here with Fernando Martinez, and actually this is the most interesting part of the discussion, because we're going to actually figure out from all this data what is going on out there. So if you're in Hawaii and you go out for a month at a time with all this equipment on a research ship, then you're probably looking at things in the Pacific Ocean. And now you have the comfort of being ashore and spreading it all out and looking at it in great detail and confirming the points of data, if you like. What do you do with it, and what does it tell you?
Well, we want to look at it in terms of what new things it's showing us in the context of all the other studies that have gone before. So we want to see what people have said previously and what seems to be right and what's wrong, and expand on that. So there's a lot of detailed analysis of the data, and hopefully we come up with new and better explanations for things. And that could be anything for how seamounts are formed, deep ocean volcanoes, to how faults take place, to how the surface or the seafloor, I keep saying surface, but it's the seafloor, has changed over geologic time. How did Hawaii get to be where it is? Why is it there? What's the continuation of this island chain underwater? What does it do? And so basically trying to understand the large long-term evolution of our planet, because that's very important.
Why?
Most things that we do on land were at one point formed in the oceans or as a result of processes that were taking place in the oceans. Most of the plate boundaries, like spreading centers and subduction zones, are underwater, and you cannot study them on land. Mm-hmm. And they determine how the surface of the Earth evolves. So if you're looking for mineral deposits on land even, it's important to know that this was once a subduction zone that now closed up over the millions of years because there were two continents on either side of this thing that eventually came and collided together and formed a mountain range. And in that mountain range, there are the remnants of the hydrothermal mineral deposits that formed on the seafloor. And so those things condition where we find minerals today and new places where we can explore for them in the future.
So you have to see everything historically. Where we are now is not, it's not permanent. I mean, it came from something different, and it's going to be something different. Nothing stays the same.
There's a continual evolution as long as there's heat in the middle, in the center of the Earth coming out and running this heat engine that continues to reshape the surface of the Earth. It changes.
Now what about, this is things that I've always wondered about, so I'm glad you're here on many levels. So you have the Horn of Africa and the Horn of South America. I mean, are we saying, do we know that these were once connected and then these processes separated them in some way?
That's right. So South America and Africa were once together, and they rifted apart over geologic time, and that's happened several times, where continents have formed large supercontinents and then split up again.
But if suppose I have a supercontinent, which would be the Americas attached to Africa. Possibly there was no Mediterranean at the time, and Europe was one great big supercontinent. Does that mean that there was an Asia, or was Asia underwater while we had this great big supercontinent on this side of the planet? There was only water on the other side, or was there another continent there?
Well, there were probably smaller continental fragments all over the place, but for the most part, continents have gone together to form one big one, and the rest of the Earth is primarily water. Usually, plate tectonic motions tend to be horizontal, not so much vertical in the sense that continents actually
east-west?
sink. Well, no, they can move in different directions, but you don't have continents sort of sinking for the most part.
So the story about Atlantis?
Yeah.
Atlantis, which was, I guess, the legend goes that it was somewhere in where the Caribbean, somewhere east of southern USA. That's not true.
Not on any large scale. Locally, small things can go up and down, but the problem is that continents are inherently lighter than the ocean basins. They're formed out of different materials. So there's more silicic granitic type rocks on the continents that will not sink back into the mantle. They can accumulate and they can get rifted and stretched, and when that happens they can locally sink, but large scale continents don't go up and down.
Okay, and I was going to ask you is, does that mean that the amount of water and land on the face of the planet is fairly consistent? The percentage of the surface that's land and the percentage of the surface of water is fairly constant, or do those change?
It's, I guess it would be fairly constant overall, although some people think that continental mass tends to grow with time, because the Earth over time differentiates it. So things get separated out chemically and they form permanent parts of continents tend to grow in time, but then that would tend to displace water. But then there are smaller scale things like glaciation events and things like that that can affect
Climate change.
Sea level particularly. So on a more human scale, those kind of variations are very important, although globally they're only amounting to maybe 100 meters of variation from glacial to non-glacial times. But that could inundate important parts of the areas we live on today.
So talking about the Pacific and trying to get a beat on where it's all going, how all those plates are shifting, do you have an idea about which way it's going?
Well, we know the overall motions of the plates. Here in the Pacific, they tend to be moving towards the west because that's where the major subduction zones are, near Japan and coming around towards the south into Tonga and the Manus Basin, other places. Most subduction zones tend to pull material towards the west. And so we're gradually drifting in that direction. But not the entire Pacific, because it's broken up into a part that is sinking towards South America as well, because there's another big subduction zone to the south of us here.
Are we on top of a subduction zone here?
We're not on top of a subduction zone here. We're in the middle of a plate here. We have...
Which means we ride the plate.
We're riding the plate, yes.
We don't have this kind of thing going on. Good, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's good in the sense that we have much less likelihood of having earthquakes and tsunamis directly beneath us from that.
I watched this really bad movie called San Andreas.
Oh.
I'm not recommending it, but as a geophysicist, you might be interested in looking at how they deal with it, because of course there's all kinds of sub-stories and romance, got to have that. But it was interesting that they treated it as a kind of a falling off of everything west of San Andreas was going to slide right into the Pacific Ocean. It wouldn't go like that, would it? How would it go?
Well, it wouldn't slide into the Pacific Ocean. What might happen is if there's a large earthquake from a subduction zone going underneath North America, it might generate a tsunami, which is more of a displacement of the water that inundates the land and then retreats back.
So the subduction goes down, the material on top of the subduction goes down with it, and then you have a tsunami coming out of the joint of those two plates. Is that what?
Well, it's more from the interface itself. So you've got one plate going down and the other plate on top, and usually those things will rupture abruptly. So you'll get this kind of displacement.
Okay.
Where one moves like that. And what that does is create a huge amount of water to be displaced. And that rises up as a big mound of water that then spreads out in every direction from that. And that's what eventually inundates places that are even far on the other side of the ocean basin. Because once formed, they'll just spread radially, like rings when you drop waves in a pond.
Like ripple, yeah.
Yeah, ripple.
So, okay, all of that goes to the question of whether we should worry here because of these processes. I mean, can you predict where the plates are going to go and when this subduction, I keep wanting to say seduction, but it's not seduction.
Although it can be.
This subduction event is going to happen so as to create that huge force of the two plates sliding on each other, and thus, a tsunami.
We can predict where these things are going to happen fairly well because we know the processes that form them, and we know that subduction is one of the most important ones, and so we know where those subduction zones are. We can generally make an estimate of the size that these are going to be from historic records and from knowing the interval when they last occurred. The hardest thing to predict is when, because when depends on exactly when this fault that's accumulating strain is going to finally rupture, and that's very difficult to predict.
Well, if I gave you new kinds of sonar, you know, more powerful, where you could look down to the bottom wherever you were, you could see, you know, sort of slant drilling, you could see miles and miles away, and if I gave you data that was dynamic from period to period, say every month for 10 years, for example, would this give you a better handle on trying to predict when these events would take place? I mean, and in the future, is that where your science is going?
Well, that's part of it. Fundamentally, it's a matter of understanding the forces and the material properties. And so the more that we know of both of those things, the more accurate we can make a prediction. Material properties are very difficult to get at because they're deeply buried. You would need either seismic methods, perhaps some drilling for the shallow parts, looking at analogous areas on land perhaps. But the problem with properties is that they're also variable. So they're not homogeneous. So knowing it at one spot doesn't necessarily tell you what the whole fault surface is looking like. So there's sort of a difficult, almost intractable at this point, but something we can make headway, you know, trying to understand general properties of things. So the other problem is understanding the forces that are acting on these plate boundaries. And those have to do with how fast things are moving. Mostly we have a kinematic understanding, which is to understand what they do in time, how they move, rather than what is driving them. And so the force balance there is difficult to get at as well.
But if you knew the forces that are driving them, you would have a better handle on predicting the speed and thus the collision.
Yeah, if you know the forces and you know the material properties, you can certainly make a much better prediction of when it's going to break, what's going to happen, what the displacements might be, that kind of thing.
This is very exciting stuff. I mean, it may happen over thousands of years, but it's still very exciting.
Right.
You know, you're at the frontier trying to figure out what the Earth is going to do. What an incredible experience. Well, that's Fernando Martinez. He's a researcher in marine geophysics at SOWEST, at HIGP, the Hawaii Institute of Geophysics and Planetology at SOWEST. Here at Research in Manoa. Tectonics under the sea. It's been great to talk with you. Thank you, Fernando.
Thank you, Jay.